live event. This Access Live event is currently in progress. Please note this call may be monitored, recorded, or rebroadcast. If you would like to ask a question during today's event, press star 3 on your telephone keypad at any time.
Because this is very important. There was a big win recently for those of us that believe that the government does have a responsibility or role to play on basic research. And you can apply that to energy, but I also apply it to healthcare and think of Alzheimer's, right? And so record numbers of dollars have been now put into Alzheimer's research and National Institute of Health. I'm also working on legislation bipartisanly with some colleagues that will establish centers of excellence in public health that are going to help promote more effective Alzheimer's disease and caregiving interventions, because caregivers are a big part of this formula, and educating the public about the disease, about brain health and cognitive decline. This is going to become more and more of a health cost issue as we have more baby boomers retiring. And there's some other areas around palliative care, for instance, where I think we can increase hospice training and healthcare professionals in this space, which is something that is really conducive for what families are looking for and patients are looking for, and sometimes those challenging times that folks weren't aware of, 5-10 years ago. And so we're moving forward on some good issues there too. But if you would like to ask a question tonight, dial star 3 on your telephone, and we'll just start rolling through the questions as soon as we can. Again, star 3 on your telephone. Don't hesitate to raise any issue you want. If I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you, and we'll just kind of keep going. We've got, I think it's David on the line from Plymouth. David, thanks for waiting.
Hi, Congressman Paulsen. My question was, I've asked it via Twitter before, and I haven't seen a response from you. You represent a district that has many people that take advantage of SALT, state and local tax, income tax reduction, as well as property interest deductions. And this new tax plan, well, I will agree, for many people, helps a little. I think we can agree that it helps a lot for those in the higher income brackets. We don't have to get into that piece of it, but specifically for those in District 3, it's troubling to me that you were part of the authorship of this tax bill, and we're okay with, in essence, harming, in many cases, people who take advantage of that in a high-tax state like Minnesota, who has shown the country the way to fiscal responsibility by actually being one of the most fiscally solving states in the union, but yet now we're being punished because of that. So I just kind of want to get your take on why, or what the defense of that particular piece of the tax bill is, because I don't quite get it.
No, that's a great question, and look, you're not the only one, of course, that has had questions about that. With tax day, this is the last year you file under the broken system that wasn't modernized in 30 years, right? So now you have finally a new generational reform, first in 31 years, that will make it a lot simpler. So next year, it's expected that 90% of folks will no longer itemize at all. You'll use the standard deduction, and all the rates were lowered for folks. So most of the benefits actually do go to low and middle income folks, just on a percentage basis. Of course, at dollar amounts, that can vary based on your income level. For a lot of Minnesotans, it may end up being kind of a wash, but there are a lot of folks in our area that have the AMT, which is also gone. They're not going to be hit by that anymore, so you don't have to calculate your taxes once and then calculate them twice. And other states are actually looking at modifying their income taxes based on some of the federal changes now. And Minnesota's going through that debate, too, on how to best do that. But I don't look at it so much as the tax cut part of it. That's certainly part of it, because as you mentioned, people are getting more dollars in their paycheck. It's like 90% of everyone's getting more money back. There's no doubt there's a lot of wealthy people that are going to pay more. There's no doubt about that, because they can't take advantage now of other deductions, and for paying people to do their taxes or the accountants or that's no longer even deductible. You lose that deduction. But rates were lowered for everybody. The brackets were expanded. The average tax cut, for a family of 4 is like $2,000, a little over $2,000. I talked to a Chanhassen firefighter recently, and he's getting an extra $10 in his paycheck with his job. I think it was every week or $20 every 2 weeks. It adds up to whatever $1,000, right? And that's real money for real people, which I think is really important. So aside from, I think the issue of SALT, and some of us did fight to make sure the original proposal, by the way, just to get rid of it and so it's really said, hey, important to keep in place, is put in a 10,000 market to have those types of provisions in there, including when some were saying, hey, let's get rid of the medical expense deduction, for instance, which would hit folks with high health care costs or medical expenses for seniors. So we not only restore that, but we actually be able to enhance it, and we actually increase the amount you even give to charity. You can give more now to charitable deductions than you were before able to. So there's a lot of positives, and it'll take some time for folks to kind of wind through that. But the good news is overall, bigger benefits to the economy too. We got wages growing finally, because for the first time we had wages declining and an economic recovery. That's never happened before in the history of our country. And so a lot of positives with people hiring more. And now people getting out of college can actually be able to pay down student loans because they're competing for jobs, wages, salary competition, which is good. And so those folks who have been working part-time can now actually work full-time. So it's kind of a mix, and it depends on your certain situation. But and some folks are going to be able to benefit from a $2,000 cut. I think in our area it's closer to $5,000 for a family of four, just on average, but the national average is closer to $2,000. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. Let's go here. I think we've got Richard on the line. Thanks for waiting, Richard.
Yeah, I was wondering when they're going to ever give seniors a raise on their Social Security. Years.
Yeah.
And I've never got a raise. Our raises have been going to the Medicare.
Yeah. Well, Richard, thanks for asking. So my understanding, and I'm trying to remember this correctly, is that last year I think there was a 2% COLA that was actually given on Social Security. Now, that was the highest we've had in years, because there were years before that. I think there were many in place. This was kind of in most of the, I'm trying to recall, sort of during the Obama administration. Essentially, there was no COLA increase. And look, you've got medicine costs going up, food costs, etc. The COLA is tied to this, CPI index. It doesn't reflect housing or health care. I think we should absolutely be looking to change that. That's something that we should be looking at. And so I think the 2019 COLA, it will get announced this fall, closer to October. And probably with a growing more competitive economy now, and with growth expected to go on, it probably bodes well for folks who are seniors or retirement planners that are going to be able to earn a little bit more interest on their savings, etc. That's probably going to be a factor. Now the Fed has not hit their mark yet, from what I understand on inflation, but it's kind of staying steady, which is a good thing. Okay, we'll keep rolling through the questions. I think we've got Karen on the line. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So as I was watching the news tonight, and everything's so crazy, but I want to know, it seems like there are several Republicans in Congress that are now joining some Democrats in trying to pass a bill or bring a bill to the floor so that President Trump, or any president in the future, which actually makes more sense to me, but that any president or his staff cannot fire the investigator.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to know what your position is on that.
Yeah, independent counsel Miller, for instance, right? Yeah.
But it would be now for him. But in the future, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, that's a great question. And first of all, you're right. Everything is crazy on the news, so don't watch it all the time. It's funny because the average person you talk to doesn't talk about Russia, the Mueller investigation. Although I will say, if you remember when this issue first arose, basically about a year ago, I was one of the first Republicans that said there should absolutely be an independent counsel. And this goes back to the firing that happened within the FBI. And I think when you got a neutral law enforcement arbiter who was removed, it only makes sense to have an independent counsel. Mr. Mueller should be able to absolutely conclude his investigation. He should not be interfered with. That should go forward. I don't think that he would be fired, despite some of the bluster of the news reports. You mentioned the bill. I think that's in the Senate, if I recall correctly. And here's the issue: is that I think addressing that tends to be sort of a side issue in the context of we're not going to be able to pass anything. And I have no problem looking into it. I would need to look at the particulars because I do think that independent counsel needs to stay. But obviously, if we were able to pass it or even get support, the president would sign it. And so I think we need to work on, what's doable. How do we keep this moving forward? How do we make sure the investigation concludes without interference? I will say, though, if for some reason that the president did fire Mueller, there would be a bipartisan firestorm. And then you'd see not only, I think, a strong reaction across party lines for some very aggressive actions. And I'm not sure exactly what that would be, because it would be more than probably just passing a law, but part of it would be passing some bills to actually drive public support, to making sure that that institution or the independent counsel concept remained remained vibrant, as sort of a concept that can actually be used. So, good question. Some people have asked about that. Okay, we're going to kind of keep rolling. I think we've got Lori on the line from Minnetonka.
Yes. Hi, Representative Paulsen. Thanks for taking my question.
Yeah.
I was wondering what your position would be on the legislation, just in general terms. I've heard that there's some legislation proposed that would remove the restrictions for doing research on gun violence. Because you're in favor of expanding research on healthcare issues, and to me that would fall in that category. So what is your feeling about that?
You're right. It falls in the same category. And here's the good news, is that, we've had these tragic gun violence incidents that have happened, over periods of time, including, and I think of this last year, right? I think of Las Vegas. I think of the Texas incident. And I think of the Parkland incident. By the way, the students who've been a part of that, I think, need to be commended for raising these significant issues on reducing gun violence. I've met with a number of these students over the last couple of weeks who are very passionate and have some really good ideas. I have argued and came out right after the Parkland incident saying that gun violence restriction research ban should absolutely be gotten rid of. It was gotten rid of. So just a couple of weeks, the law is formally, finally changed. And so I think the gun rights, or gun advocate groups have for a long time been able to block that research by the federal government from being done, because, they would argue, it's just going to lead to a slippery slope, or then you're going to be advocating for gun control. I mean, my view is that if you're doing basic research at the government level, you've got to have facts to establish good policy. And so why not let the research go forward? And that's my view. So the good news is that's done. It's formally lifted. Now the CDC or the federal government can do that research. There was also some changes in the background check system, which is really important. Obviously, the one change that was made significantly is in relation to that Texas incident that happened, where there was a person that was the person who had committed the crime in that tragic incident in Texas. He was discharged from the Air Force. He had domestic violence issues. None of them were reported into the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. And so that was fixed and addressed also a couple of weeks ago. So those two issues together were fixed and addressed. And so now that's mandated to be included in your data. Is only good in the system as the data you're putting in. You've got to put that in if you're going to have an effective system. I think we should go further. I mean, I have, signed on a legislation to ban bump stocks. I mean, that makes no sense to me why you've got a device that makes essentially a firearm an illegal weapon. That should be banned. Now, I know, the NRA and some government groups don't like that, but I think that's a common sense response to the tragedy that happened to make sure that that type of incident doesn't happen again. And I think also, and this is what I'm looking into now and hoping to move forward some ideas for a bill, are gun violence restriction orders. And this essentially, and similar to what happened in Parkland, if you or someone knows maybe an individual that you feel may be a threat to themselves or to others based on what they're posting on social media or saying, and you tip off law enforcement, which is what happened in Parkland, I think law enforcement should have the ability to come in and take away the weapons from that individual, or, search and take away guns if that individual holds them. And that allows you to do mental health evaluations. You not only prevent a potential tragedy from happening that could impact a lot of people, you prevent suicide. And we've had increased suicides that have been happening also, by the way, with use of firearms. So I know a lot of gun groups don't like that, but I think having that extra check absolutely makes sense. If you can put due process provisions in place to making sure you've got a follow-up procedure for after an evaluation. But why should the Hennepin County or local sheriff, often check in someone who's got mental health issues at their local jail? They'll take away the firearm if they've got one while they're in jail. But when they leave jail, they've got to get it back. I mean, that's wrong. We should have a system in place that doesn't allow that to happen. there's no magic answer, obviously, but there are ways that we can improve that process and make some headway. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think we've got Patrick on the line. Patrick, thanks for waiting to meet and pray.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I'm calling to asking to see what your opinion is on Senate S-2362, which is Protect Your Credit Reporting Act of 2018.
Okay.
Allow consumers to have control over who has access to their credit report at no cost. You can unlock your credit bureau in a commercially reasonable manner. Again, no cost. I'm also working with state legislators here in Minnesota to push legislation at a state level to protect Minnesotans, but I'm wondering what your opinion is on this and if there's anything going on in the House specifically relative to giving consumers control over their credit report to 3 or 4 companies who we have no business relationship with. They are repository of our most personal financial information, and we don't even have a business relationship with them.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, I am not that familiar with it. Can I ask you a quick question? So you mentioned this was a Senate bill, or did you have a number? I think you mentioned. Remind me.
2362.
2362. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm going to look at it and have my team here look into it too, and find out if there is a House companion. Because if it has an S, I mean, it is a Senate bill, but there's usually a companion. And it sounds like it may be a financial service committee issue, and we have a couple colleagues, both Keith Ellison and Tom Emmer, who are on that committee from Minnesota, so I can, connect with them too and get their feedback. But it sounds like you think this is a good idea to be looking at this, right?
Well, absolutely. Again, I mean, our personal information is out there. Anybody can acquire on our credit files, and we have no control. And if we want control, we have to pay the department to lock and unlock our credit files.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to dig into that. Thanks, Patrick. No, I appreciate that. And it's one of those things where you can't, be on track with everything. But I get a chance to actually look into another issue and find out if there's, if it's a party line issue, if there's some bipartisan support, or kind of where to go. Okay, I think we got Scott on the line from Meet and Pray. Thanks for waiting.
I'd like to ask about your position on the proposed tariffs, please.
Oh, yeah, thanks for answering. Well, again, I kind of hit this on the opening statement, so you may have just been dialing in at that point. So my view is the president's wrong to impose the tariffs, as I mentioned in the opening dialogue, is that I think a lot of the benefits that we've seen in the economy and the 800,000 jobs we have in Minnesota that are tied to trade can get reversed or put in a negative context real fast with broad-based tariffs. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't have narrow targeting going after China or bad actors that are stealing intellectual property. Absolutely the case. And we can do that. But I don't see, with the broad-based tariffs that have been proposed, how you can avoid either retaliatory measures that may impact our manufacturing, like medical devices now have been listed by the Chinese of their targeting and putting tariffs on there. I mean, that's going to hurt a lot of our jobs in Minnesota, as well as the farm and agriculture side of it as well. So, and I mentioned earlier, too, when we were talking about this on the opening, is that just steel and aluminum tariffs have already driven up the price for a lot of our small manufacturers that export around the world. And they don't even buy foreign steel. They source American steel, and they've seen 40% price rises. Today I had a gentleman in the office. He lives in Edina. His company is in Buffalo, Minnesota. And he says, look, I got employees working at that company. I can't find enough workers to work there, but now my projects are getting put on hold because we've seen a 40% increase in steel just since November, and it already risen another 40% earlier in the year, and the expectation that we could be going down this road. And so I think that's one of the issues that we have. Again, dial *3 on your telephone if you'd like to be put into the queue. And now I'm going to ask you guys a quick poll question so you can hit a button on your phone. And then just not to switch topics, but to give you another perspective, as you know, over the weekend, the United States, at the order of the President, participated, along with our allies, France and Great Britain, our allies, in bombing Syria at 3 specific targets. So the question for you is, do you support the President's decision, or do you believe that the United States was right to do that strike as a part of response to Syrian Assad, the leader, Bashar Assad in Syria, using chemical weapons on his own citizens, on his own people? If you think yes, every response, hit 1 on your phone. If you think 2, no, the United States should not have engaged in that with our allies anyway. Hit 2 for no. And if you're undecided, hit 3, because again, everything's not cut and dry with a yes and a no. So 1 for yes if you think the bombing was the right response to do. 2 if you think no, not the right thing to do. And then hit 3 if you're undecided. And that just gives a good little snapshot on a poll. Okay, we want to keep rolling. I think we got Tom or Thomas on the line for Medina. Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. This is a big issue. I'll try to pose my question as efficiently as possible. It has to do with Medicare.
Okay.
And the deficit. All these other issues, I agree with you on a lot of them, and they're all important, but they're all totally pale in comparison to the deficit. We've been able to ignore it for a while with low interest rates and whatnot, but it's current expenditure on healthcare as the baby boomers pass through the Medicare is unsustainable. And it's about the issues you talk about. It's about it's an issue that could potentially affect all our ways of life in a very significant manner. I mean, all our ways of life, not special interests. So it's something we have to address together. And I don't want to be a one issue border, but to me this is everything else pales in comparison. So I just wonder if you could share with me, you have my insight into this, and give me some hope that there can be some resolution, because I don't really I'm not very optimistic about it right now, but people recognize it as an issue.
Listen, you're raising one of those issues that needs to be tackled or addressed that, unfortunately Congress or Washington has ignored until there's a crisis, right? And, personally, anything that's done in this space has to be done bipartisanly, obviously. Ronald Reagan, this example, you go back to the Social Security changes that were done in the 80s, they were weeks away from a crisis happening. And you deal with a Democrat Congress, and they did some changes. That needs to happen again in areas like Medicare. So you mentioned Medicare driving the debt. I mean, look, domestic discretionary spending was going down like 4 years in a row. It went back up with the recent budget agreement, but that's not where the debt and the deficit is coming from. It's coming from mandatory spending programs, and Medicare and healthcare is a big driver of that, and that is growing at a rate higher than inflation. And it's Medicare, it's Medicaid, it's Social Security, and it ends up being a situation where Medicare goes bankrupt first. I think it's in like 2027 or 29, in that zone. We got to have more people working, obviously. You got 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day. There used to be 11 workers for every retiree. Now there's 2-to-1 ratio. And it's true that we have a growing competitive economy that's going to help on the revenue side. Even the Congressional Budget Office, which I don't always agree with because they don't get stuff right, acknowledges that revenue is now increasing. But now we got to look at the other side of the ledger, which is really important. The problem is no one really wants to tackle it. I do think the answer is in chronic care management and reimbursing our providers. In the area of Medicare is a good place to actually look at for coordinated care, where doctors and nurses and your specialists and pharmacists, etc., we get reimbursed for caring for you or a senior on Medicare on how well you're doing, rather than just the amount of services that are provided. And some of us bipartisanly had proposed this idea 4 or 5 years ago. We didn't get a lot of traction on it, to be honest, although we did have a lot of patient groups and stakeholders like Mayo Clinic and others that said this is the right thing to do. It's a bigger conversation. That's how you address the bigger spending issues in terms of debt and deficits, for instance. I agree with you on that, but there's really not a lot of folks, not enough, that are actually raising that or bringing it up. Okay, I want to keep going. We've got from Champlin, looks like Sequoia. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I apologize.
No, you're pronouncing it correctly. My question is, what is your position on immigration in a whole, and as well as DACA?
Immigration and DACA, yeah, that's like, well, first of all, I'll take DACA separately, and I'm an advocate for immigration reform, but I think DACA is one of the easiest to address or take care or deal with, and that's because, these are young people that have come to the United States through no fault of their own. They've essentially grown up here for all practical purposes. They're America's children. They don't know the other country where their parents might have been from. They don't speak any other language than English. I think in Minnesota it's about 6,000 or 7,000 that we have. I've met with a number of these folks. high school or even college. They're taking care of working 3 jobs, taking care of their families or siblings. These are the types of people we want in our system, especially when we have a labor force a jobs gap right now where we can't get folks. It's only natural to go to these folks first. They're going to be productive, folks in our society in every respect. I mean, for all practical purposes, they're America's children. On immigration, again, I just think it only makes sense to have the pipeline filled with workers in this space, whether they're high-knowledge workers where we can't fill jobs, or agriculture workers and low-skill jobs where they can't fill them. And so having a more streamlined visa system, for instance, and that's part of the problem with the so-called illegal immigration, is a lot of people are just overstaying their visas. We just have to have a working legal system that keeps our economy working, is not locking out the next generation of immigrants. And there's bipartisan support, because I have my own bills that I've introduced in this area and have bipartisan support. But we haven't had enough traction, just like the DACA debate, to actually get them across the finish line, unfortunately. So those are just a couple of thoughts in that space. So I'm actually, a supporter of doing those issues. So again, if you'd like to ask a question, dial *3 on your telephone, and we're going to roll now. We're going to hit, I think it's, if I have his name right, it looks like it's Michael from Plymouth.
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, sure. So I want to pose a question to you about H-1B.
H what?
H-1B visas.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So we know the arguments from the media that the con side says that H-1B visas take jobs from Americans and depress wages, and the pro from industry leaders is we can't find enough workers, and if we don't take the H-1Bs in, then our business is going to go overseas, and we're going to actually lose jobs. That's kind of the pro argument.
Okay.
I have the question is, would you consider other issues in the H-1B policy? And what I have in mind is that coming to grips with American industry that uses H-1B is just simply inefficient. We need H-1B visas because they're inefficient. And the second economic point is that H-1B is corporate welfare. Congress has had him sucking this corporate welfare for 30 years. I think it's time to just grip this reality, grip the reality that they're inefficient and it's corporate welfare. And so I was wondering if you have a comment about that.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Michael. And actually what Michael's saying is actually just a little bit on the flip side of the immigration, ironically, on immigration that we just chatted about. So H-1B visas, for those that aren't aware, they apply to these high-skilled visas. So they're subject to an annual cap. There's a lottery system that happens every year. Typically what's happened, and I can't remember how many applications are awarded, but it's something like 300 and some thousand get submitted, and about 85,000 are allowed, or something like that. But bottom line is, when they do the lottery, there's more applicants than are awarded in the lottery, and it fills up like right away that day. And so that's how quick they go with these H-1 or high-skill visas. And so there might be tech workers, there might be other engineers, and I've met a lot of these folks. Now, the companies that actually apply for these visas, they do need to go through a rigorous process in making sure that there's not, there's no American that has, applied for a job or would do the work. For instance, they got to have those checks. Now, I think what you're referring to, Michael, is actually coming to grips or looking a little bit deeper to make sure that there is efficiency as a part of this process, because obviously some companies do rely on this or count on it or have a part of their business model, but we have to have sort of checks in place, right, on this. So I don't know about the corporate welfare side of it, because I know there are companies also, and I've spoken to some that just say, look, we would hire people locally in a heartbeat if we could fill these spots. And I remember I read with one company, Indian Prairie, and they said, they had a need for a couple of high-tech web-based systems engineers they were trying to hire. They ran an ad in the Star Tribune, and essentially they had just, with India and actually grow the office in Eden Prairie at the same time. And so that worked as a positive. But it shows you the challenges that some of these companies have in terms of finding the skill set to actually maintain their business operation. There was another engineer company in Eden Prairie, for instance, says, if he didn't have access to these H-1B visas, he'd be out of work, and his company would go under, and everyone else would get, laid off that's at the company. So it's not always a cut and dry issue both ways, so I'm absolutely willing to look a little bit deeper at their inefficiencies and take a peek. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think we've got Abraham on the line from Brooklyn Park. Thanks for waiting. Abraham, are you still there? Oh, I think we lost Abraham. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. Okay, I think we've got next on the line. It looks like we've got David from Bloomington. Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. And thanks for taking my call. Yeah, my question is around the security of our schools and what your thoughts are around protecting our children and their most susceptible, or arguably their most susceptible environment, and let me underline, protecting the Second Amendment rights that are given to us by our Constitution.
Okay. Yeah. And just give me a sense too. I mean, do you have any initial thoughts, real quick? Because there's been definitely some talk about this lately. But any thoughts, real quick, that you might have?
I think there's some very interesting options out there. I don't think there's a quick fix.
Okay.
I do think that putting some sort of armed security at our schools, creates a parameter or an initial defense that is probably some of the most secure. I kind of agree with the argument that it's difficult to remove weapons from everyone's household, and it is a right that's constitutionally protected. So, what are our options for some of our future generation here?
Yeah, and you're kind of hitting the pulse of what I met with those students I mentioned earlier, right? From the students who were part of the walkout, a month ago or so. I met with them as well as, a lot of just folks who have been, sharing their thoughts, advice, on, assault weapons ban or, different provisions, or like I mentioned, gun violence restriction orders. But the school violence component, there are some things that can be done. This was part of some dollars, actually, that flowed recently federally down to local grants, down to states and to local districts. I do think, I personally do not think the answer is arming teachers. Now, if a local school district wants to do that, fine. And certainly districts, I think, for the most part, have put in security measures not only for the ability to get in, because I've been to 245 classrooms now. I had my 245th classroom visit just a week ago in Minnesota. And every school is different, every classroom is different, every teacher you learn more and more from based on their certain situation. My wife, a public school teacher, for instance, she would not want to have to even think about carrying a firearm. But, some would want to put security maybe in some fashion at their entrance, like you had mentioned, have armed security. That makes sense. That should be a local school decision. So some of these grants that have been provided are going to be able to go in for school safety funding, for instance, training for teachers on different things to do or be aware of. Also, first responders are very, very important. There's absolutely no reason why a parent should think they're dropping off their child at school and they won't be safe. And you can't, obviously, as you mentioned, protect every situation, but we do have certain rights under the Constitution that have been given and evaluated by the Supreme Court, and the Second Amendment is one of those. It was evaluated just a few years ago. No right is absolute. There are restrictions and confines you can put around them, and those generally have been reviewed and stand the test of time, etc. So, great points. And that's just some thoughts. I think it was about $1.something billion that was just given a couple of weeks ago. It was in the same bill, actually, that included lifting the ban on gun violence research. So now you can do the research. And it also included the fixing the background check system, the fix NICS background check system, so domestic violence and those issues actually get put in, which is good. Okay, so there's a couple of thoughts. I think we got everyone in on the poll question. Again, if you want to ask a question, dial *3 on your telephone, and we're going to keep rolling. I think we got Cindy on the line from Minnetonka. Thanks for waiting, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you. Even though I don't feel that this is a particularly legitimate town hall forum, because you're not having people live talking to you and being able to speak back and forth. I would like to go back to the topic of Special Investigator Robert Mueller. I would like to ask, are you willing to publicly and clearly stand up against President Trump if he chooses to fire Robert Mueller?
Oh, yeah. Well, like I was already happened. I've already said the president should not fire Robert Mueller. I've said it many times. I was on the radio today and said it, that shouldn't be the case. And obviously, this is a legitimate forum. You just asked your question live, and thank you for sharing, which is good. And so that's why we're just, caring for everybody, no matter what your view is. So we'll keep. I'm not exactly sure what she was getting at there, but okay, we'll keep rolling. We got Matthew on the line from Minnesota also. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, I'm actually from Minneapolis, but nice.
Sorry.
Thanks for taking my call. I'd like to ask about net neutrality. It's been a fight that's gone on for a very long time, for the long administration, and I'd like to know what you're doing about it, because right now states such as the state of California are working at the state level to protect it, and I want to know your viewpoints and what you're doing.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, give me your sense. I mean,
Yeah, so I think that net neutrality is definitely in the public's interest, because it makes it so that these monopolies, these telecom companies, can't take advantage of their monopoly. Right? Okay. So that's essentially what they have. I can see it around my neighborhood. Like there's one or two telecom companies that service my area. So they can charge me whatever they want as if they agree with each other, and I think that it's also important to, protect people's data.
Yeah. Well, there's obviously been a lot more about the data protection issue in the context of Facebook, right? Privacy, Matthew. So, yeah, thanks for what you say. And for those of you who don't know, net neutrality is this concept of making sure that regardless of how to phrase this in some way, basically that everyone should have access to a free and open internet, right? Which I absolutely agree and believe that should be the case. I would want to make sure that everyone can access any content that they want on whatever device they choose. So I personally support permanently preserving that open internet that's free of blocking. You shouldn't have any blocking of content. You shouldn't have censorship and unfair discriminatory treatment of specific internet traffic, that forces you through a certain pipe, for instance. Now there has, as you mentioned, because you said this has been kind of going back and forth. You got the FCC, which is a regulatory agency that wanted to just kind of, rule the internet, kind of sort of like the old utility telephone laws. And I don't think that necessarily makes sense. I think personally, rather than going back and forth, like it was one way under Obama, it's another way under Trump, it may be different in 2 years, we should put in statute that you can't do blocking, you can't do throttling, and you can preserve that, have that put in place, that no discriminatory treatment. That's my view. And I also believe it should apply to everybody in the context of, look, you've got Google, you've got Facebook, and now those folks, they certainly don't want to be included in some of this oversight because they have their business models on tracking, your data, or, not having sort of the oversight or having more freedom to kind of pick and choose kind of how they handle things or what they, allow to be posted or advertised. So, I mean, I think it's got to be applied to everybody across the board in that context. So, that's what I think needs to be done. And it's not easy to do because the legislative side doesn't necessarily have all that bipartisan support, but I think it is important to do. Okay, we got Lisa on the line. Thanks for waiting.
Yes, hi. Thanks for taking my call. A lot of money is being dumped in the treatment of opioids, which is very costly, and it really is falling on the burden of the taxpayers. My question is, what about preventing the problem in the first place? Why should the burden go to the taxpayers? Why aren't we holding the pharmaceutical companies accountable and taxing them, for example, per pill? Because they are actually the ones that are causing the issue.
Oh, yeah. So I should have mentioned this. Thanks, Lisa. What I should have mentioned earlier, too, is that one of the things I did a couple of weeks ago was I had 2 opioid roundtables in Minnesota, and one invited, I had all the different family members, and there were mothers who had lost a family member, a son, for instance, who had overdosed. Very heart-wrenching and terrible, heartbreaking stories. And these family members, and some who are recovering addicts, for instance, and talking about what happened with their friend. One woman lost her fiancé to addiction. And so a couple of things. I mean, there's been some talk about, as you mentioned, like doing like a tax on every to be more on going in a different direction where, and we've had a doctor, for instance, from HCMC come in, and he just did some testimony to some of us on our committee on healthcare, which is really good. And he basically said, look, you've also got a lot of other pain management that's out there, and it's not just pills. And so a big part of this is that he said is educating my colleagues, my physicians, so they're not just doing prescriptions. They're actually saying, hey, there's an FDA-approved device that if you get a backache, and you can actually do an infusion of some sort that will help you on a pain management side. We have to make sure we're looking at the 200 plus of devices or technologies that are already approved that a lot of doctors aren't even aware of. And so this was a physician who was really advocating for that. I think there's a lot of merit to that. There are also things we can do to require Medicare drug plans to better educate their enrollees about opioids for pain management as well. That's an education effort. Coming up, I think next Saturday, we also have this drug take-back day that's coming up where people turn in their pills because a lot of people have expired medications. So I want to encourage everyone to pay attention to that. It's going to be a national effort to draw attention to it. And the answer isn't obviously just providing more money, as you had mentioned. I know there's a lot of grants that are going to help people, but it is also making sure that we're addressing the problem knowing full well that this is actually rolling over into some problems now we're seeing in our workforce issue. It's actually had an impact on the length of longevity of life, where we have a decline in longevity of life, and it's because of opioids. I think 115 people are dying every day now, for instance. So there's plenty of room for more work to be done in this area. And the good news is it's really bipartisan. The drug makers are going to have to give some real straight answers to some tough questions also next week that is coming up in a hearing that's going to be taking place on the Hill. So we'll want to make sure that they're accountable, or everyone's held accountable. It's a part of that background in terms of providing, like you said, those pills or those prescriptions too, which is important. Okay, we want to keep rolling. I think we got Karen on the line from Coon Rapids. Thanks for waiting.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking the call. I didn't think I'd come up, and now I have about 17 different questions regarding lots of other people's comments. I want to comment, I want to ask questions on those questions for you, so now I don't know where to begin. Please do that drug take back with the opioids. I can have personal stories about that, because that's incredibly important to me. I've lost too many people, and I've had very personal, serious issues with this, and I think it's incredible, and I do think the pharmaceutical companies are very much a huge intake. I'm a resident of Minnesota. Growing up, I've lived mostly half of my adult life not in Minnesota. Okay. My biggest issue, moving back just within the last 2 years, is the confusion of I'm feeling terribly with income and staying out of a very big career that I've done for 28 years, and I have been doing the same thing. I've moved around the country. I've been in small markets. I've paid more, and I've come back here, and I can't afford housing. Yeah. It's just rent, and they raise rent every year, $100 a month, and they do this, and it's like, I don't get a raise of $100 a month. I a very large, stable company, cannot disclose, and there's no way they're going to just, they did some tax reform, and we're going to pay you some extra money. No, I'm going to get the standard, 20 cents an hour. That's not going to cover my rent. I'm a single mother, unfortunately, with a deceased father, and I don't have the options to just go and get all this. So over 60 to 65% of my income is just rent for a very, very poor place and daycare and schooling, and I'm still making what most people would consider relatively decent. Gotcha. Low wage, above enough where I can't receive services, but just enough to where I can't afford anything and keep up. And I think I don't understand this state and where that's coming from. And is that in the Minnesota taxes? What is happening here? They could answer me that. Otherwise, I'm thinking, gotta get out of here.
Karen, thanks for reading that. Look, it's probably a combination information. I will tell you this. I mean, housing, you first of all, bless you, God bless you as a single mother going through that trying situation. 60-65% of your money going to housing costs. I mean, that's not atypical or non-typical, for some of the challenges that folks are having with housing costs right now. And I know that because I worked on the low-income housing tax credit to making sure that that was not only going to get preserved in the law when we were going through tax reform, but that actually would be enhanced. And so I was able to successfully do that. I was working with our state housing agency in Minnesota, Commissioner Tingerthal. She came out here. I spoke to all of the state housing agency directors that came in from around the country. In fact, they even gave me a little award for my work in this area. The bottom line is we need to do more investments in this area, more incentivizing for builders and others to actually build these different projects and apartments and rental facilities. That can be done. And there's some other, funding that comes down, with different homeless assistance and rental assistance programs. But I do like the idea of incentivizing building more housing and getting folks to build affordable housing. And that's something that I'm working on and committing to do. Okay, I want to keep rolling. I think we got Dana on the line from Bloomington.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, I've been waiting a while. Anyway, my question is about the voting on the GOP plan. I sent some emails to with my views on some of the things that they voted on, like the tax plan and the omnibus bill, all that kind of stuff. And I wonder, are you going to continue to vote for the GOP plan no matter what they're voting for, or what?
Oh, well, definitely not. No matter what no matter what they're voting for. No. Obviously, on some initiatives where there's similarities, like on tax reform, obviously very important. I'm differing from the presidents you mentioned earlier on trade, for instance. So sometimes the GOP is not altogether. The Democrats aren't altogether on some of these issues either. So as fractured as I think, unfortunately, Republicans seem to be going, more far right to appease, some of the base or whatever. But Democrats are doing the same thing on the left, and it prevents a highly partisan environment to do good policy. And so it ends up being a situation where you end up needing more people that are willing to work across the aisle, willing to work to get things done, and acknowledge that compromise is not a dirty word. And so we have these organizations that track our voting or whatever, and I discovered this last week that I am number one in the entire House for getting the most co-authors of my bills. And I just do that because, again, if it's a good idea, I get people to sign on and work, I work the House floor and I get to know people, and I want more people on my bills, regardless of your party, to sign on. And I'm number 3 out of all 435 members for my bipartisan co-sponsorship. So that's actually really good. I mean, in the past, I've passed more legislation in the minority than I have in the majority. And that's because the pendulum always swings back and forth. You shouldn't rely on who's in charge or who's in power. You should just, legislate good ideas, good policy to improve people's lives. And that's why I think some of these issues like, human trafficking or issues like getting rid of these therapy caps on Medicare that prevent our seniors from accessing physical therapy and speech therapy and occupational therapy. We've got permanent solutions put into place now fixing that. And the Alzheimer's initiative that I mentioned earlier. I mean, this is really good bipartisan stuff that is making a difference in literally saving lives. And no easy answers. It's all very challenging, but very, very important. So, again, good question. I appreciate it. We're kind of getting at the end of our call. I'm getting a signal because they only allow us to be on for 1 hour. If you're on the call, don't hang up because everyone goes into a queue or a voicemail, and then either myself or someone on my staff, we get back to you in the next 24 hours because your thoughts are important, your views are important. So don't hesitate to just stay on the line. We'll write it back to you as soon as we can. And don't forget, if we can help you in any way, it might be red tape with an agency. We're doing a lot now with the IRS because it's tax return season, for instance. Might even be a passport or a Medicare or a veterans issue. Let us know. We can cut through some of that red tape periodically. Not always successfully, but being an advocate on your behalf with some of those agencies can sometimes help and clear through a lot of clutter. It might be a foreclosure issue, for instance. So most importantly, I want to encourage you to keep in touch. It's a privilege representing you. I continue to do my weekly email newsletters and my video questions. We'll take some of the questions we got tonight that we didn't get to, and we'll do that as part of my video response. I do every week. I pick a couple of questions of people writing in letters and emails. I get a lot every day. And we do that on a weekly basis, too. You can just sign up for that. Every other week we send them out at paulsen.house.gov on the website, of course. And have a great night. Have a great evening. Spring is finally on the way. And be sure to stay in touch. And thanks again.
The Access Live event has ended.
Thank you again for participating in my telephone town hall meeting. I'm sorry I was unable to get to everyone's question, but please feel free to leave my staff a voicemail with any questions, comments, or concerns from the call. This is an emergency. You can contact my district office at 952-405-8510. We'll be sure to get right back in touch with you. Thanks again, and it's an honor serving you in Congress.
If you wish to leave a message, please press 1. Otherwise, you may simply hang up.